On the morning of August 1st, 1966, shots ring out from the observation deck of the clock tower on the University of Texas campus. It marks the infamous beginning of the modern era of mass shootings in America.
I'm Sarah Ferris, true crime podcaster.
And I'm Catherine Schweit, the former head of the FBI's active shooter program.
And you're listening to Stop the Killing. Hello, everyone. This week's episode, we are sharing a YouTube live that we did with Dr. Shiloh and Dr. Scott from the LA Not So Confidential podcast. When we recorded this, we had not had the pleasure of meeting them in person, but only a week later was CrimeCon London, and we got to sit down with them, have a drink, share some stories. And let me tell you, we will definitely be doing another crossover episode with them in the future, so stay tuned for that. But in the meantime, we hope you enjoy today's episode.
Hi, everyone. So we have the host of Stop the Killing on today. And Stop the Killing is a fantastic podcast that I talked about in an episode pretty recently when Scott and I were talking about what we listened to. But this podcast began in 2021 as this deep dive into the mass shootings and the case files of the former head of the FBI's active shooter program. And so in the pink, we want to welcome Sarah Ferris. Hi, Sarah.
Hello.
She is an award-winning true crime podcaster based out of the UK, known for such shows such as Conning the Con, Clueless, Guilty Greenie. I need to know if it's sunny in London because it's been nothing but rainy and drizzly in LA. And I'm like, if I have to go to London to get some sunshine, that's weird, but I'm leaving next Friday. So
You'll be very pleased to know that it is super sunny, but the sad thing is I'm sitting inside and I have been all afternoon recording with Catherine and not enjoying it. So
oh my God.
it's irrelevant, really. It's
Catherine,
irrelevant.
how could you?
I know. I should have known better.
Yeah.
known better.
You guys, like, this already speaks to me about how efficient you guys are, that you've been recording and then you had this and you just lined it all up.
It sounds
but-
efficient, but don't be fooled. Don't be
Yeah.
fooled.
Oh, I
We
hear
can
you.
relate. Yeah.
Yeah, and we're in the same city. You guys aren't even in the same country. So I can imagine the effort and appreciate the effort. But let me introduce Catherine. So Catherine Schweit is an accomplished author, attorney, podcaster as well now, and former FBI special agent. She's the author of the book, Stop the Killing, How to End the Mass Shooting Crisis. As an adjunct professor at DePaul University and Webster University, she teaches courses in law and policy. And she's a member of various organizations, including she's a fellow ATAP member to Scott and I, which is the Association of Threat Assessment Professionals. Of course, our audience is somewhat familiar, I think, at this point, and is a recognized expert in crisis response, workplace violence, and corporate security policies. So welcome to both of you.
Thank you. That's a lot of words. That's very kind of you to say all those words.
You
Oh,
haven't got any more time because you've just ended up telling everybody Catherine's entire career. It's quite the
Well,
career, isn't it?
It really is. And every time, you federal agents really know how to have multiple careers in a lifetime. And Scott and I feel like we've done that as well. And I had to cut that paragraph down. So you guys, there's a lot more where that came from.
Yeah.
Well, welcome. We are so thrilled to have discovered your podcast and also so thrilled that we're going to get to hang out with you guys in a few weeks. And
I'm very excited about that.
Yeah. Catherine, did you do CrimeCon in London last year?
I did not. I was out in Las Vegas for CrimeCon my
Okay.
first time.
Yeah.
I
that
didn't-
was,
I haven't
that
been
was
to-
my first time.
Yeah, and I haven't been to London, so I'm going to be I'm so excited to come to London. I'm leaving Thursday night.
Oh, good. Okay. Well, I will be out there on Friday. So, and then Scott's joining us right before. So we're taking some long overdue vacations and making it one big extended vacation. Well, let's
Good
get into
plan.
it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Sarah, most of your previous podcast episodes have to do with con artist stories. And how did you make this hard turn into mass casualty events as a topic to explore?
By everything in my life at the moment is just accident, really, I think. So, I wasn't a podcaster before. My first podcast was just such a crazy story that it had to be told. So I discovered how to tell the story through the podcast medium. And that was a personal story about my little sister who swiped right on a serial con man. And after that podcast, I happened to be invited onto a platform, an audio platform that was for creators of podcasts and just really interesting people. And when that happened, we had this Zoom meeting and everybody had to go around the room and sort of introduce themselves and say what they had done to end up on this, special beta testing of a platform. Felt all very, behind the velvet rope.
Right.
And I didn't know anything. I mean, it's a complete muppet and new to this situation. So I was just sitting on my bed thinking I wouldn't have had to put the, webcam on. Not the case. And we're going around and I kind of go, they ask the question of, so what have you done? And I'm like, well, I'm a complete imposter. I don't even know how I ended up here. And then the next person kind of goes around and says, oh, I've done radio and TV and blah, blah, blah.
And these are people who say, I have 3,000 episodes on my podcast.
Oh my gosh. Exactly. And I'm just sitting there super intimidated on my bed going, how the heck am I in this situation? And it gets to lovely Catherine. And she says at the beginning, she goes, well, Sarah, I can relate because I'm an imposter too. And I'm like, oh, thank God there's
Love it.
Yeah. And then she goes on to say, I'm the former head of the FBI's active shooter program. And I'm like, well, one, she doesn't know what an imposter is. And two, we're clearly going to have to connect. And that's kind of how it happened. I just sort of reached out.
That'd be when I'd be like on camera, like brushing the Cheetos dust off my shirt. Like,
Right.
oh, I guess I'm going to have to up my game here. Yeah.
I'm like, she's on to me. But yeah, so anyway, after that, I just said, do you want to do an interview on this new platform? And she was kind enough to ignore me for about 3 weeks until I stalked her on Twitter. And when we did connect, we kind of went, she said, I need to do a podcast. I'm like, hey,
Oh my gosh.
join me.
Yeah.
The platform I had been on a couple of podcasts, and because my subject is a little complicated sometimes. And so this platform was looking for podcasters, and someone on there had kind of stalked me and said, you should do a podcast. And I was saying, no, I can't do a podcast. I don't have time to do a podcast. I can't do a podcast. I don't have time to do a podcast. And so that was the whole story. And then I saw Sarah and she's like, oh, I'm an imposter. I'm like, honey, you've done a podcast. I don't even have that. So I'm like, you can't tell me you're an imposter. So I had no experience except for being on podcasts and on other things.
That is a great segue to my question for you then. I mean, certainly Dr. Shiloh and I have almost exactly the same experience, and we're still straddling the worlds because we're still working full time. For you, having transitioned out of your position at the FBI, we know it's hard to cross that barrier from professional to media platform, but what was it like actually for you to do the show? And once you got over, okay, I guess I'm going to be doing this, how did you find yourself?
Which
in that
happened
place?
about season 3. I just want
Very recently.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Your question, sir.
Well, no,
What
it's
happened
like,
when you?
Yeah, like so you say it took you a while to kind of get in the groove, but you were probably already in the groove as far as the audience was concerned, right? How did you guys work out all the logistics to make this happen?
And what the formula is for your show, really. And if that's
Exactly.
changed, if that's evolved over time.
Well, Sarah can probably give you the best description of the show and the formula because she's juggling a bunch of podcasts and I just have my little podcast. But for me,
podcast.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
well, for me, what happened is when I left the FBI, it's because the FBI kicks agents out at a certain age and it's mandatory. So you have to go.
Mhm.
And so I left, I went into private industry and I realized that all the work that I had done running the FBI's program about these active shooters, these mass shootings, they were really still struggling out in business and industry and schools, trying to figure out what to do. And I was constantly being called for interviews on podcasts. And, I'd do an hour here and an hour there and on interviews during the news segments. And a shooting would happen and I'd call, can you get on and explain what's going on and explain what the police should be doing and what should civilians be doing? And that was a constant thing. So I was writing another book at the time that I was really enjoying. And my book agent said to me, you can't get the book done because you are spending too much time on all this other stuff. So you need to get all that stuff out of your head. So just write a book about all that stuff. And then people will stop calling you for that.
Ha ha ha. Yeah.
which was a complete fail.
Yeah. Guessing that
Right.
didn't happen.
Yeah,
That did
that's
not
just going to
happen.
make more people call you.
So I did write a book, Stop the Killing, How to End the Mass Shooting Crisis. And that was released last year. And actually just a couple weeks ago, I released the second edition, which I'm really happy about because it's a softcover book. And so it's cheaper. My original publisher had published it in a hard copy, which is great, but makes it more expensive, right? So I did that. And it was around the time that I was working on the book and coming out with the book that Sarah and I had this connection.
Mm.
And I realized, I think naively, oh, maybe this is a better way to manage my time. And that worked out so well. So,
Yeah.
so well. And
How's your
actually,
Saturday going?
I will say
Yeah.
this. Yeah. Yeah. No, it's fantastic. It's 75 outside and sunny
Oh,
here. And
my
I'm inside
gosh.
on a Saturday. But I will say this, you know what Sarah said before? Sarah has said previously, which I think is really spot on. She's the target market for this podcast. People who are parents, people who work, and they're worried. Their worry is over occupying their mind. And instead of enjoying a Saturday or instead of enjoying their visit to the mall or to the movie theater or to church, or they're letting their kids safely go to school, they just feel like around every corner is some mass shooter. And that's really not true. The numbers don't bear that out. But that's kind of part of what we talk about is replacing, fear with facts.
Well, I can tell you that from the people who've started listening, because I mentioned your show, like I said in a few of our episodes ago, that I have a friend that binged the entire thing. I'm like, I'm not even done with it. How did you binge all of it? Like, what are
Wow.
you doing? And she's like,
Wow.
and then I
Wow.
listened to Catherine's book. But she said, what
Wow.
it did for me is it brought me hope and it made me less scared. And I was like,
Yay.
I know. And I thought, yes. Because, when Scott and I are diving into the research on this, or we go to an ATAP conference, and it's just like, it is less scary the more facts you know, and not everybody has access to all of that. And
Mhm.
True.
it is so deeply emotional as a parent. And, I think for those of us who have worked in and around law enforcement, you're around it and you have these facts all the time. So it could also go the other way where you are now sort of blowing this up into it's just around the corner, right? One
Yes.
of our default cognitive distortions, of course, that I'm trying to undo all the time with now my clients working in a clinical. But I think whatever your formula is and whatever your vision was really has made that goal. So
Oh, thank you.
and I know for me, it felt like it's almost like, you're co-host on this, Catherine, but you're just taking all of these interviews that you've done and you're like now the professional interviewee / podcast host with it.
I don't want to be.
Well, it's working. It's working.
Well, I'll
So,
say, one of the things that you mentioned about the ATEP conferences, you're working in a particular area, and I think that I'm a generalist in some ways, right? Expert at none, right? And so the value in that is that I've been at these shooting scenes. I've been at the locations. I've talked to the people before. I've talked to the people afterwards. So really, I'm able to say, well, these are great things that happened before that help this community. I was just a Friday having lunch with the Michigan State University police chief. He had a shooting at his school, 8 students shot, 3 of them killed. And they had 10 years ago brought their 911 centers together for that whole community in Ingham County. And because of that, instead of having 2 911 operators on at 10 o'clock at night or 8 o'clock at night, they had 12 on and 8 more who showed up, who took the 2,400 calls and
Yeah.
text
Wow.
messages that they got, which is work that was done ahead of time, having no idea how valuable that would be down the road, but it was. And I think I have that broad perspective, and I think that helps to maybe sometimes for me to key in on particular things that audience members might bring up, or
yes.
people might bring up where you guys are really experts in your field, but maybe don't know as much about law enforcement, response on a particular thing.
Absolutely. Just a anecdotal story for myself as a parent. My child is starting a new school, and they've been so lovely. They scheduled a meeting with my husband and I this week because technically they were interviewing us. But of course, when they asked, like, do you have any questions during that process? My question to them was, what is your threat assessment protocol? And
Yes.
which I had had in my head. Security has always been very important to us. But I didn't love their answer. I'll say that for a crisis situation, they have some great things in place. But we had this follow-up call this week. And so a question that I asked, which I think I've heard from Catherine on one of the episodes, they were talking about their camera system. And I said, but can you access that off campus? And I had Catherine's voice in my head. I think for parents, knowing, they might not be as super gung-ho as I would be, but to ask some of those questions, because even
to be curious. Yeah.
Yeah. And I told them, like, if you've thought about this a million times, forgive me, but I just need to hear it. And that's every parent has that right. So
yeah, no parent should ever feel bad about asking about something that involves their safety or the safety of their child. When your kid goes to play at somebody's house, you shouldn't hesitate to ask that parent, hey, do you have guns in the house?
Yeah.
Or how are they locked up?
Absolutely.
There's nothing wrong with that, but we're always so polite.
Well, and I know that that's probably a weird question for parents to ask. So I always tell them, because we do have guns in our home and my husband's still active law enforcement, that yes, we have guns here, but they're all locked up, because I know I want to ease their mind. Sarah, how have you sort of experienced this evolution in true crime podcasting where more subject matter experts and professionals are starting to enter the space, either to have their own shows or sort of co-host? Do you feel like the audience is hungry for some of that? And how do you think that's evolving?
No, I think the brilliance of podcasts is the accessibility you get to people like Catherine and yourselves. Because I mean, even with Stop the Killing, when you say, kind of how did we come up with the formula? Part of it was me being listener number one and being a conduit for the audience and asking the questions that people that aren't in law enforcement or aren't professionals are thinking. And it's just so amazing. I pinch myself all the time when I'm having these conversations with Catherine and the amazing guests that she gets on to the podcast. That accessibility is in everybody's ears at home.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's a great thing, and I don't think that means that it pushes out other, the indie podcasters. There's space for everybody. And it's just about finding what your story is to tell. And I mean, I use on all of my podcasts, I've had professionals come in. So on Conning the Con, we had a psychologist that came through and ran through all of that kind of the red flags of con artists. And then on Clueless, the Long Con, which is another conning story, which is, again, about my family. Very unfortunate connection there, but, don't get too close to me is the clue there. But, and you'll meet the forensic psychiatrist that I brought on board for that because he will be coming to CrimeCon in London. So, yeah, I think it just adds an extra dimension.
Yeah. Yeah. I think access is key for sure, because not everyone can have access. I mean, they can't have access to necessarily the trainings, perhaps. And not everyone wants to sit down with a book where,
That's right.
My bookshelf might be Stop the Killing, Trigger Points, and The Violence Project, but that's not everybody's, and they don't want to read all of that. So,
No.
I mean, there's also, our experience. We have such, I'm so impressed by the people that subscribe to us and listen to us, but it's interesting some of the experiences we have where Shiloh and I will go down the rabbit hole to Wonderland in sort of our own psych research issues. And what, listeners will go, ugh, too academic. And we'll go, oh, no, that's a valid point. We were getting into research that really kind of gets us stimulated with stats and ratios, and that turns some people off. So, for us, we kind of are trying to straddle two different worlds. And it's interesting to see how your audience members react to what you put out there.
Well, you two are both in the same field, whereas I've got Catherine and she has to speak like, true crime for dummies to me. So it's very accessible in that respect, isn't it?
True crime and Muppet.
I was just going to, Sarah, I don't think of you as a Muppet most of the time.
Most of the time.
I'm
I was
dressed
just
like
gonna.
Miss Piggy a little bit, to be
But
fair.
it's
But
very
anyway.
cute. You're very cute, as you always are. I was just going to say that when, we were looking at a formula of what we thought would be appealing, certainly, as Sarah mentioned, we both have different positions that we come from, but we wanted to kind of create a format style so that each episode you'd kind of know where you were going and where you were coming from. And we didn't want to lose track of the idea that we started from the very beginning, which is let's look at an incident and then say what occurred before the incident, and what might have maybe potentially, now that we talk about the subject, what might have been there to be seen by others or heard by others. And with the idea that, hey, if you have this ability to see and hear things around you, which we all do, here's what you need to do with it.
Right.
So not focusing on the shooters, but definitely telling the story of the shootings and the victims. And because of that, as Sarah mentioned, we've been able to, tap every, I'm constantly calling friends of mine and saying, hey, do you have a spare half an hour? Hey, do you have a spare, and that's the Frank DeAngelis, who wrote the foreword to my book, who is the principal at Columbine High School.
Yeah.
But, just different people from different areas, whether they're behavioral experts, whether they're police officers, whether they're school principals, whether they're researchers.
Yeah.
Well, it's starting to fold in the real people that have lived this, that have also studied it, that have responded to it. And that's that extra layer, because as Scott and I know, like your podcast does have to have some sort of evolution. And, it's just been really, it's been really cool to listen to Sarah, like you as the student, like things click that you're like, oh yeah. I know what to pick out in this one. I got it. But that's what your audience is doing too. Hopefully, and taking into real life.
I am a slow learner though, aren't I, Catherine? We've just finished recording and I said something about, I don't know, do you think that person snapped? And I literally could see her reach down the Zoom and snap, like whack me on the hand.
That's our pet peeve too.
Yeah. But it was good because, you know what, we did have a little, 5 minutes of, what does that really mean? And the kind of the trajectory and, you wouldn't say somebody snapped if they punched somebody, if they were having an argument before and somebody had pushed somebody in the shoulder, right? So it's a progressive effort. And that's just what it's like. So we had a fun discussion about that.
One other thing I would say about the podcast is that it had to have this because I'm very much a glass half full kind of person. We had to end on a high note as many times as we could with some stories of hope and heroism. And also something that people can take away to feel that they've got some control and power in the situation. So that's the driving force a little bit behind, not just entertainment, as I like to call it. It's all about leaving something that gives people control.
Yes, it's perfect to end each episode that way, for sure. So, Catherine, can you tell us a little bit more about the formation of the FBI's active shooter program, how you became involved in that, and what do they do?
Sure. So, I was an agent with the FBI for 20 years, and an agent does what an agent is assigned. So I'm a national security agent for 15 years, working counterterrorism and counterintelligence and espionage cases. And I'm working in Washington, D.C. in December of 2012 when the Sandy Hook elementary school shooting happens. And all those children are killed. 6 women are killed in the building. But I will point out, I'm just going to say, because if we might not close back to this, that children who were trained in active shooter training at Sandy Hook just a few months earlier, several children escaped the classroom because of their brave teacher. And those children are alive and adults today, bigger today, right? Because they knew what to do. So don't think that training is useless. So the Sandy Hook shooting happened, and President Obama assigned then Vice President Biden to create a task force of federal agencies and to get their heads out of their, get their world together. And I was the FBI person, I think, because I was like walking down the hallway at a given moment, as happens. And so I was voluntold, hey, can you do this? So I joined the White House team with these executives from other federal agencies who were trying to say, what's the problem and how can we fix it? And we focused on, kind of 2 areas. What's the problem for police and how can we fix it? What's the problem for civilians and how can we fix it? And
you mean as far as police response?
So the police focused on police response. We created a different type of We work through, push out all across the country the type of protocol that police have now to go to the shooter. I don't know. I had $30 million out of my budget, I know, that went to training police officers in their communities so they didn't have to travel, training them for free with our personnel who would travel to their departments and train them so that everybody was on the same page. So anybody who shows up at a shooting now should know exactly what to do, and all kind of have the same basic protocols. So that's fantastic. And then the other side of it was, what should civilians do? And out of that came Run, Hide, Fight, developed originally by the city of Houston, and other training. And we worked with other communities to develop, other federal agencies to develop community recommendations and best standards and practices, which is a lot of government gobbledygook. But what it means is we're all talking with one voice. We worked with a team of medical professionals to change the way that we think of tourniquets. And I grew up thinking a tourniquet would make your leg fall off. Now we know that's not true. And that now we say, do give tourniquets, do put tourniquets on people. Another team at the White House developed the Stop the Bleed program that's out there, which is just tourniquets, find a way to stop bleeding. That's good practice. You can't use a Band-Aid on a knife wound.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's been 2 or 3 incidents at the law enforcement agency where I work where the Stop the Bleed program has saved officers' lives from horrific car accidents to shootings.
Yeah, and one of the things that we did is we just again, when you've got the money in your budget, we bought thousands of. I think I ordered 30,000 tourniquets and med kits for the agents, and then we just distributed them. And then we said, this is the standard practice. This is what all law enforcement should do. If your department isn't doing this now, buy tourniquets for your people. And we set that standard, and we use it as a hope that other departments will do the same.
Yeah. And so was there a study on active shooter incidents that came out of that program?
I think it was kind of inadvertent because when we started meeting with the federal agencies, the Department of Education executive basically said that the news media was just inflating all of the drama about these shootings. They weren't on the increase, and we should be spending more money on plenty of other things in schools, but none of it should be on anything that has to do with potential shootings. And we didn't really have any data at the FBI, and there wasn't really any solid data looking at actual police reports to see whether or not these shootings were increasing. So, in fact, I dragged together borrowed a bunch of analysts, and we started what turned out to be the FBI's annual reporting on active shooter incidents. Active shooter being somewhat like a mass shooting, but an active shooter isn't a shooter actively engaged in killing or attempting to kill people in a public area, in a place where there's a lot of population, as opposed to the majority of mass shootings, which occur like in homes and in neighborhoods. But the ones that are out in public are the ones that we're so scared of. They're the smallest number of shootings, but they're the ones we're most scared of. So we put those stats together. And when we did, we found that, in fact, like in the first 7-year block, there was an average of 6 of these types of shootings a year. But when we looked at the next 7 years, there was an average of 16. Last year, there were 50 in the United States. The year before that, there were 62, using all the same numbers criteria, all the same methodology. So definitely they've been increasing.
I love also sort of one of the recurring themes and a big statement you make in the book, which is just completely something I feel completely in line with, is that we have to stop looking for single answers. We have to stop looking for simple, linear Band-Aid on a head wound answers and take a back step, look at how complex all of this is and interrelated. So can you give us an idea of, with the numbers you were just talking about, how do these mass shootings, then specifically school shootings, fit into this larger framework of firearms deaths and homicides in the U.S.?
Yeah, I can. If you can stand the numbers, I can spit out so many numbers so fast.
Well, I'm going to love it. We'll take our audience along with us. I mean, I don't know if I'm going to love it, but I think it's important to talk.
I'm going to say thank you. I'm going to apologize ahead of time to the audience members who are not numbers people. I am a writer, so it was hard for me to pull all these numbers and keep them in my head. But just as an example, the latest CDC, Center for Disease Control Prevention data that we have on firearms deaths in the United States, firearms-related deaths in the United States, is from 2020. So in 2020, because we are the federal government after all, in 2020, there were about 45,000 people killed by firearms in the United States. Of those 35,000, about 25,000 were suicides. So the largest number of deaths in the United States with firearms are suicides, which is why we talk a lot about lock your damn gun up. So 20,000 are suicides. Another 20,000, almost 20,000, are homicides. And 500 of those firearms deaths are children who are what they call unintentional shootings, children who find weapons. 500 a year, 600 people killed by police. Of those 500 a year that are killed where children find a gun and kill somebody else, kind of like accidental shootings. Now I want to take that step away and look at what mass shootings are and what we think about mass shootings and active shooters. 45,000 people killed in a year, 25,000 suicides, 20,000 homicides, 500 or 600 police killings, unintentional shootings by individuals, less than 100 mass shooting victims. In the active shooter world, less than a couple hundred when it comes to all of mass shootings. So mass shootings and the shootings that make all the news and the shootings that people are most afraid of make up less than 1% by far of the shootings deaths in the United States. So where should we focus our attention on? And when you were saying how there isn't a single answer, imagine if I can't find a single answer to just the mass shootings. And if we're talking about all of firearms violence,
Right.
then it does involve suicide prevention, locking guns up, gang and drug warfare in cities. People say, oh, those shootings all occur in cities. 80% of our population in the United States lives in an urban suburban area. Most of these types of shootings that we think about with schools occur in suburban areas.
Okay, you're blowing my mind because I never conceptualized it like that. And I'm almost embarrassed to admit that, but wow, that's really, and that is not part of the narrative at all. That's really not at all in mentioned in media. Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
So that was so frustrating. I feel like I started out trying to explain, and as I said, my book agent said, just put all that in a book so people will stop asking you and you can stop saying it aloud. So the same thing happened with guns.
Right.
So this Saturday, a week ago, I released this tiny little paperback called How to Talk About Guns with Anyone that has that kind of information in it. And
I'll make room for that in my luggage for bringing home.
Okay, great. I know. And it has in the back of it, it has one of my favorite ungrammatical chapters. It's called Not Gonna Happen, Might Happen.
Well, and again, like that feeds into the fear is that, okay, now we know from the numbers that it's happening in more suburban areas. So that's that feeding that trope of like, can happen anywhere, can happen at this tiny little, now we have a private school, which private schools really hadn't been targeted areas, but now.
But they had been before. That's the thing is that people don't know that and they didn't see the stories on it. But private schools have been shot.
Sure.
There have been shootings at private schools before. But now we have national news media that covers everything every time. And I'm not racking on the media.
It's just
I worked in media. It's just different. And they're covering stories that people want covered.
Yeah, no, for sure. And so one of our listeners on here brought up that 2020 was a lockdown year. And I know data takes a long time to get and put out there and publish. Are you seeing what trends are since COVID in any significant way?
2017, 2018, 2019, 30 active shooters, the FBI called every year, 30, 17, 18, 19. 2020, that year racked with COVID, 40.
Got it. Well, I mean, the mental stress, the chronic anxiety that we were all under, I'm sure contributes. And even with the numbers you were talking about, we can sort of umbrella those back and forth because if we look at 25,000 suicides, we know the majority of these mass shooters are suicidal. And that's part of their plan to die by suicide or die
30 to 40%. And we did see a significant rise in homicides in the last couple of years. Although I will say from a per capita basis, the United States it's much safer than it was in the 70s.
Yes.
And it's hard to see that long term unless you know the numbers, but it's much safer. Or we have a lot less firearm violence than we used to.
And it's easier to proclaim the opposite of that. it's just sloppy and easier for so many people in this kind of discussion. But thank you for explaining that. By any chance, do you know within those numbers when you're talking about how many of those gun deaths could be specifically attributed to domestic violence or intimate partner violence events?
Some estimates are as many as 45% for the homicides.
Yeah. We did an episode just sort of looking at that as the grievance or the precursor, and it's quite a bit. So there's another layer.
Sarah and I come across that a lot, don't we, Sarah? With
Yeah.
that there's those conflicts that are kind of domestic based.
Yeah, definitely. So just kind of moving along, Sarah, as a non-American, how has this podcast?
And this is a safe space. You can be
It is a
open and
safe
honest
space.
with us.
We have
Let
a
it all
very
out.
worldwide audience.
Oh. Well, it's definitely been an evolution. I mean, I started the whole interview off with the very first interview I did with Catherine was, why the heck do you just not get rid of all the blooming guns?
Right,
I mean, that's
right.
what we're looking at America going, come on, people. I mean, why not? But since then, having done 4 seasons with Catherine, it's just really kind of gone on this journey of understanding that it's such a different problem. And yeah, I mean, my image of America is right now, I probably wouldn't send my son there to uni at the minute, if I'm being completely honest. We're like, stay here. But I love those things that have come out of it, like that total tiny little sentence you said before that you probably didn't think too much about, Catherine, was that actually America is safer now than it was when it comes to gun violence. And I think the perception outside of the country is that it's not. So I love that I get to hear that stuff. And that has shaped my understanding of such a complex country. And also just probably didn't realize, genuinely the size and the differences in each state. So it's been a real education, I think. And, I'm coming over for CrimeCon in September.
Man.
So
Orlando, Florida, even.
show me what you got, America.
We're
Good
not
to
going.
Bring some anti-frizz hair gel because you're going to be hitting some major humidity, let me tell you.
Oh, that's not good for me.
Oh, man.
No.
Even we were like, Orlando, I think we'll pass this year. We're just going to go to London.
Oh, no. Why didn't you tell me this beforehand? It's probably too late to cancel.
Oh, my
dear.
goodness. Well, and it's funny that you say something like, I wouldn't send my kid to uni over here. Every time something in the news hits, I'm like, time to move to New Zealand. Like, let me start looking at those psychology jobs in New Zealand.
I mean, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and
you don't
Sarah's in London, but she's from New Zealand.
I
So
know,
it's perfect,
I
right? I
know.
mean, that's her place, man. She was there for
Yep.
a couple months, right? Not too long ago.
Yeah. Over Christmas. It's a great
Very
place.
nice.
To visit. I don't work for the tourism board, but you don't have to.
One of our
amazing.
Patreon members is a clinical psychologist in New Zealand, and we're always like, we're going to be asking for jobs.
Oh, that's amazing. I probably know her. There's only 3 of them there.
Oh, there you go. Probably.
No, I'm joking. I'm joking.
You all know each other, right?
Yeah. Of course. Yeah. He's my cousin.
Anything else, Sarah, that just as a student, that's been your biggest sort of takeaway from this journey with Catherine and the show so far?
Probably the top of the list is that I'm clearly not using my life properly. I've had not anywhere near as many careers as this lady has.
And keep a job.
I'm always absolutely astounded at what she manages to pack in. But probably the biggest takeaway, I think, for me is that we have power in our communities. And if we can actually motivate people to be the eyes and ears instead of waiting for government in whatever country you're in to make those slow grinding changes, that's where I feel the most powerful from what I've learned from Catherine, is that actually it's taught me that I am part of the first line of defense in stopping any of these kinds of incidents. And it doesn't have to be mass shootings. It just has happened to be, the angry guy at the street on the corner that I wouldn't have reported earlier that might go on then to key someone's car down the road. It's been an education and teaching me how to be a better citizen, I guess.
Yeah. More
Ask my
attuned,
neighbors
and then
probably
to
like
act.
me more. Yes. They don't. But
Yeah, empowering, like Catherine was saying, not being afraid to ask those questions or
yes.
say something. And if it's a nothing, then it's a nothing. And someone will
Exactly.
examine that and figure it out.
Can I just add one thing too here? I have an unexpected byproduct of this, is that I have been working in this space for more than 10 years at a time when I saw 6 shootings a year that fit into the category. And now last year there were 60, right? The year before, and then 50 this past year. So I really had a kind of a sense of frustration that I was just a gong in, in the wind and nobody was hearing it. And the podcast has given me, I think, that comfort that there are people listening, and every once in a while we'll get some message from somebody who's a Patreon, or they have an inquiry and they'll say, I did this, or I found this, or I heard this. And we all know that that's what it takes, is that each individual. And so it's really helped me to keep moving forward on this mission.
Yeah, that's lovely. That's the stuff you don't even think about when you start a show like this, is those little anecdotal stories. And I like to think that there are a few brave souls that write in and do tell us that. And hopefully there's more doing it that we don't know about. But yeah, that's really nice when you get that feedback from folks of how you're impacting just their everyday, regular lives in a really important way.
Actually, and one of the coolest things that ever happened, just because it was the ego filler, is I got a call from a guy on a plane once, and he said, hi, I'm reading your book, and I have this problem that's happened at my company, and I need your advice on it. I was like, holy cow.
You're like, here's the number to my consulting business.
You opened up their perspective to something that was problematic that they may have not even, had an inkling of before. What a huge paradigm shift for people as we,
it's very gratifying.
Open our perspective up. Catherine, I wanted to say, I guess to put maybe some bookends or a starting point, that since Columbine, what would you say have been the biggest strides in prevention, like say in the threat assessment field, the world, and what are the biggest strides that we've made in our community about that intervention, response skills or tactics? What would you say about that?
I think that I'm very comfortable that law enforcement knows what to do in response now. Where in Columbine, even though they knew a lot about how to respond, they had so many things they didn't know how to overcome, like radio communications between SWAT teams and things like that. All of that is on the wayside now. And absent, a particular incident, law enforcement knows that their job is to go to the shooter. And they're so determined to do that now, no matter what the holdups are, no matter what the challenges are. Love that since Columbine is there. There's also this, because of Columbine and afterwards, this massive community of people who have been through it before, who are supporting. There's a Frank DeAngelis, who was the Columbine principal high school I mentioned before, created the Principal Network. And it is a network of principals who call out and reach out to support other school officials when they have a shooting occur. There are police chiefs doing the same thing.
Yeah.
People are reaching out who've experienced before. So I love that in terms of recovery and response. But I also love the at the moment of that, even though there are some different versions that some people use, I love that nowadays I remember the first time somebody came into my office with a printed email and said, look at this. This university tweeted out run, hide, fight. And we thought that was amazing, because we didn't think that we could ever get the traction to make run, hide, fight a national messaging. And that run, hide, fight is a national messaging. In the UK, they use run, hide, tell. But the concept is the idea of these are 3 verbs. And now, even though it's taught kind of in different ways, and sometimes people use different words, everybody knows that. So many people, and even though there are adults, I'll say this one other thing, even though there are more adults who are like, we're dragging into the 20th century, as we used to say, trying to convince them that it's okay to say run, hide, fight. And they're like, oh, you can't talk about fighting. That's scary for kids. Kids are getting it. Kids are all saying run, hide, fight. They're tweeting run, hide, fight to each other. And so the generations since Columbine have grown up with this, and they're not nearly as afraid of it as the adults are around them. And so the adults will pass on, and the people who are worried about scaring people, that's not happening. But the one other thing I wanted to just add, as you asked about threat assessment, I just really struggle with, I'm an ATAP member, but I'm not the threat assessment professional, obviously, that the rest of you are. I just play one on TV. And I feel like we're just really still struggling because people don't understand and know how to engage in that. We talk about it in our podcast some, but not nearly as much as we should. So I guess you guys should be on our podcast.
Well, and Scott, I mean, you do more of this and get more of these phone calls that I certainly do. But my view is that maybe some like companies, your Netflix, your Apple, your YouTube, they get it. And it's like because there's money at stake, they kind of have those things in place. I don't know if, and maybe there's just too many schools and it's money or what have you, but I feel like that's where it still needs to be trickled down of having a threat assessment team and what that even means. But
Or
I don't
just
know,
a
Scott.
protocol. Like, I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
my encounters with the schools in Southern California are just across this wide spectrum. You'll walk into a school and they've got it down. You're talking to the principal, the assistant principal, and they've got just A, B, C, D, E. They've got everything in place, which is so like, oh, great, I can take a breath. And then I'll get another referral, a case I have to go look at with my detective partner. And we walk in and there's nothing in place, like literally nothing, closed off affect because they don't want to even admit that they don't have anything.
Right.
And, it's also jarring that after all this time and after everything that's happened in the last decade, that there are still educational institutions that don't have a plan. Yeah. So, but one thing I do love, because our location is a training site and we have law enforcement come and go through our training every month. We have people from around the world. And one of the things that I see that's amazing is that even like when we have law enforcement come from these rural areas, all the skills are there, all the instincts are there. It's just about imparting to these individuals a new paradigm, a new thought process to use all of that information that already exists. And I'm going to be handing out copies of your book to all of them, because I think
I'll sell them to you at a discount. Great.
Oh, right. Well, sell it. We'll buy it in bulk. But Sarah, I did want to ask you, what does it mean to the mission of education to bring a topic like this to the fans of true crime? And there are a lot of us out here. There are a lot of fans. This is a genre that every time we think, okay, it's on its last legs, it finds a new way of emerging into the zeitgeist. So tell me about that. Like, what does it mean to have this mission for you?
Such a good question. I think there's been such an evolution in true crime, the genre anyway, hasn't it? Like, when you look back at some of the early podcasts.
It was pretty gory.
It was so gory. And I mean, that's one of the reasons that I found myself in the space that I was, because, sometimes back in the day, and it's quite a new genre in terms of, you think 2015 Serial came out and then there was a sort of explosion of true crime. And I would just be hungry for putting it in and listening. And then I just found myself like, walking the dog or something, just going, oh my God, this is just jarring and horrific. And what is the purpose of this? And I think there's been definitely an evolution in terms of what the purpose is. And I mean, my podcast company that I have now is, my tagline is community podcast. It's podcast with purpose. Because if there's no educational value to it, I just really don't. It's just not who I am. And I think it's really strong in the crime con as well. That has a safe space for that particular kind of true crime genre, where it's all about lifting the voices of the victims' stories and those experts that can tell it in a respectful and useful and unscary way.
So what are all the things you guys are going to be doing at CrimeCon?
Sarah?
Well, I will be jazz handing it on the Creators Corner. Yeah, let me tell you about me. So that'll be fun. And I just love that. It's so nice to get to connect with actual people who spend the time with me in their ears. God bless their little cotton socks. I'll send them straight to the psychologist afterwards, so you might get them.
There you go. Maybe we can get our booths next to each other.
That'd be good, actually.
It's a great experience, but it is a lot of stimulation. I mean, it's like at the end of the weekend, we were fried. We were really fried because people want to come to you, and there are so many stories. There are so many types of people that present at these conventions that, and because I'm a clinician, I was trained at the master's level as a clinician, at the doctoral level as a clinician, and I just get pulled into these stories, and you realize that I'm glad we're moving away from the goriness of it, and we're moving towards victim-centric rather than glorification of perpetrators. And you realize that there's a lot of people out there that are traumatized, and this is a way, I think, of them being able to process their trauma, and we're all a part of that. I take that responsibility quite heavily. I did want to say one thing. I wanted to share a quote, and I'm going to do my best impersonation of Catherine because this comes from your book. And I think it is, again, we touched on it earlier, but it's so very important. Stop looking for a single answer. I'm going to quote you. Equally fatal to the effort to stop active shooters and other targeted violence is a focus on a single solution. We are the meme, post-it, soundbite kind of world right now, and messages must fit into 280 characters. Not helping is the persistent view that there must be a single solution, such as take away the guns, arm teachers, security at houses of worship, and find more good guys with guns. I just thank you for laying that out there. And I wish that could be engraved on the doorway to schools right now, instead of some other thematic things that are problematic and popping up right now. But I'm going to say that I think your book should be required reading for anybody in threat assessment, because your paradigm clearly generalizes to the larger areas of crime that we all need a better understanding of. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. That's so kind of you to say. Thank you so much. I mean, it's really written from the heart. When you live around sadness as an agent, you want to empower people and make people feel hopeful. And that's my goal. That's our goal in the podcast.
And Catherine, you'll be doing a book signing at CrimeCon London?
I will be doing. I'll be signing both books. I think if we can get the second one there, it just came out, so we're trying to get it there. But I'll be signing both books, and I'm going to be doing a speech also. I'm going to be doing a platform speech talking about the name of the talk is Mass Shootings in America. What's that all about?
Awesome. Sounds fun.
And we're doing a live show as well, aren't we? We're doing a live
USA.
That's right.
Okay, so you're doing.
And we're going to do a live podcast from there, so it's going to be a crazy day. I think all of that is on Sunday.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
wow.
Maybe is it Saturday?
I don't know. We better tone down Saturday night then.
Yeah. My goodness.
Busy Sunday.
Well, please, Friday night, we're going to be doing just a casual meetup at night. I'm sorry. Friday night, June 9th.
At Bike Shed.
Yeah, at Bike Shed London, 6 o'clock.
Okay. Wow.
Hang out. We're kind of co-hosting that with Justin and Aaron from Generation Y podcast. But yeah, our talk is going to be on Saturday night. We're doing a presentation on incels. So we're going to be talking about the latest research and some case studies and the psychological aspects behind it. But where can our audience find you guys, either together or separately? Books, website, social? Give us everything.
Mine is easy. Mine is KatherineSchweit.com. KatherineSchweit. KatherineSchweit.com. And it links to everything.
One-stop shop. Love it.
One-stop shop.
Sarah, what about you?
Well, you can tell she's got a social media person who actually thought about that, because mine's not quite so easy. So, the best way to get to me is an Instagram, and it is the production company. So it's at CON for Nigel, Munity Podcast. Simple as that. Community Podcast.
Perfect. Well, we will link all that here for our folks. And
thank you.
We're so grateful for your time and for the conversation. I feel like our audience can't get enough on this topic, which again, I think just lends to easing some fears, increasing some hope, and doing that with facts. Thank you so much, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks for listening. And if you want to know more, Catherine's book, Stop the Killing, is out now. For more details, go to KatherineSchweit.com. Please consider also supporting our independently made podcast. It's simple to do. Go to patreon.com/Stop the Killing. And for as little as the price of a latte a month, you can be part of the solution to stop the killing. Patreon rewards range from official do-gooder status to ad-free episodes, autographed books, and opportunities to connect with us directly for your business, school, church, or even just a book club chat. But just knowing that you are part of a movement that has the power to make your community safer, well, that's got to taste better than a skinny cappuccino any day. So please head to patreon.com/Stop the Killing now and polish off your do-gooder halo, and make sure to include your name so we can give you a shout out. This podcast is a Community podcast production. That's Con with an N. If you want more content, then head over to Community Podcast at Instagram, where you'll find trailers on more binge-worthy true crime, like the award-winning podcast Conning the Con. And check out our show notes for all the links mentioned. Finally, if you want one takeaway action that you can do right now that can help make our community safer, please share, rate and review this podcast wherever you listen. Everybody needs to know that they hold the keys to see something and say something. Together, we can stop the killing.
It's one of those things you hope never happens, but you better train for it, because it will happen, and it will happen in places you wouldn't expect. Be ready for it.